This is Michael Riccards with the Whole Institute Forum, and our guest is today Bryan Lonegan. Bryan, you were saying that the real problem isn't one of immigration. It's really one of employment. Give us an idea of what that means.
Well, 20 years ago, you might remember we had our last great legalization plan where 3 million undocumented individuals were given the opportunity to obtain lawful status. But in exchange for that, Congress had struck a deal that there would be greater enforcement on the border as well as enforcement in the workplace through employer sanctions. For the first time in our nation's history, we put it upon employers to verify and confirm that their employees were authorized to work in the United States, that they had proper status. And this has, I think, been the main reason why we've seen 20 years later a growth to 12 million undocumented workers. Now, how does that work? Intuitively, back in 86, we thought, well, if people are coming here to work, let's make it harder to get a job by doing this employer verification. But what happened is that the employers, most employers, are very honest and comply with the verification process. But in many industries that have low margins of profit, that rely on labor, the employer verification system has been used as a way to exploit workers. Basically, they do a cost-benefit analysis. The chance of my getting caught by the federal government violating the law in this regard and suffering a sanction is outweighed by the benefit I have of hiring the undocumented. And now I get to use this verification process as a way of keeping those workers in line. So the employer verification system has, I think, been a failure. And yet, again, 20 years later, we're talking about making it even harder. So that's the first problem. The second problem came with a Supreme Court decision called Hoffman Plastics, in which the Supreme Court in 2002 said, well, for the first time, we're not going to allow undocumented workers to have the same rights and remedies under our labor standards as documented workers. So now you have the employer verification system keeping workers down. You now have the workers having no legal remedy to address those problems. And that combination, that 1-2 punch, has resulted in an underground economy of undocumented workers. Tied in with that, you have the increased border security, where people used to come to the United States, work, return to their home countries with the money to support their families. We've made the security so tough, that the security on the border so hard, that the cost of entering the United States is much greater. So when people come now, they're less likely to go back and forth. Once they've gotten through first time, they're not going to want to take a risk of going back. That has spawned in itself 2 new areas of criminal enterprise. You have the coyotes that now have to guide people through these dangerous deserts, and it's an expensive proposition, a dangerous proposition. And you also have now, because of the employer verification system, the rise of document fraud. So all kinds of mischief arose out of 1986. And here, 20 years later, the solutions that 1986 was going to give to us have not been delivered. We're talking about going back and revisiting those same solutions, which seem intuitive, but they don't address the fundamental issue of why are workers coming here in the first place? Why is it that they can get employment? Now, here's where a lot of people would become surprised. I actually would like to find some way to reduce that reduction, to reduce that unlawful undocumented migration of 500,000 people a year. And the reason why is because when those people come, they compete not against American laborers, and that's, of course, that's a huge debate as to the effect undocumented workers have on American workers. But clearly, the new wave of undocumented workers come and compete upon the prior wave of undocumented workers. So the situation constantly becomes worse, because there's always this supply of willing workers that will work in what are ever diminishing quality of workplace rights.
So you're saying that the real competition is with different waves of people coming in that are undocumented?
I think that's true, particularly when you look at it. I can prove my point. I think the easiest way is look at the industries that undocumented workers come to work. We're talking about agriculture. We're talking about light manufacture. We're talking about domestic workers, restaurant workers. These are the industries that attract most undocumented workers. I think it's no coincidence that those industries are also the ones that have the least workplace or labor rights. So, for example, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, there are special provisions and exclusions that deal with the agricultural sector, light industry, domestic workers, restaurant workers. There's all these exceptions from the minimum wage laws and the minimum hour laws that apply to those industries. I don't think that's a coincidence. So if we could strengthen our wage and hour laws and allow the undocumented to seek remedies, it would become unprofitable for employers to then seek out ever-increasing numbers of undocumented workers. I also feel that the primary way that we can secure our border with the South is to have an economically vibrant and stable economy in Mexico. If the people of Mexico could have economic opportunity, they would be less likely to come here. And perhaps what we should be looking at is greater investment in Mexico itself.
Very good. We'll stop and break and be right back.